Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
You are in the right place for conversations about current needs that we as business leaders face regarding technology, customer expectations, and quickly changing markets, aka anything related to growth and growth strategy. This program is about what it means to reach our short-term goals and increase our confidence in our long-term positioning for sustainable growth over time. This is program 204, the risk of not taking the next step. And today I'm talking with Edwin Williams, who founded Perserbid, and he co-founded the startup Tri-Cities in Tennessee to help entrepreneurs find the resources that they need to grow successful businesses. Today, we're talking about risk of the actions we take, because we always evaluate those. But how often do we evaluate the risk of the choices that we leave behind, that we say no to? Edwin, what are the potential risks versus the potential rewards? Basically, what's the downside of not making an investment in your business?
The downsides can be pretty huge. And the marketplace, you're always facing new challenges, new situations coming up. And if you encounter a situation where the market changes and you don't make that investment to adapt, someone else will come and take your place. Also, conversely, the market could be going well and things are going fine, but you'll always have somebody at your heels. I like to use lions as a metaphor, where male lions are always in competition with another male lion, and the lion has a pride. The younger lions will always be trying to take over that pride. You can see it as a marketplace. And if you are not doing what you're supposed to adapt, keep your market happy, someone else is going to take that, and then you're out of business. Conversely, though, you also have to be careful when making an adjustment, because if you make the wrong adjustment, you can drive yourself out the market anyway, because people aren't happy about what you did. So it's one of those things you really have to look at what's going on, what you're hearing back, and make that adjustment accordingly.
Man, two really big things and two different sides of the coin in a lot of capacities. I was thinking about, is there a story in my past, which of course there is, but how do you just pick one, right? How do you just pick one of these learning experiences? And one that came to mind for me when the downside of not making an investment, okay? Here is one that I faced, and I know a lot of our audience, and maybe you have too, and that is, I can remember a time where it was time to make a capital investment. Mm-hmm. However, sales were really good. The staying on track with the ride of the sales increase and the continued growth at a fairly exponential rate took precedent. And we said, maybe later. And we kept saying, maybe later, as we're exponentially growing, maybe later. Well, a year went by and it was a risk. Now, in the moment, it's like, oh, it's all good, no problem. We've got growth. Everything's the way that it goes. Well, when our sales plateaued, by the way, our sales plateaued and took a downturn because we lost our largest client. So, whoops, right? Whoops, the biggest client was gone. Now, the writing wasn't even on the wall. We took everything for granted. We took our relationship for granted. We took the fact they were acquired by a big company. We were like, oh, good, solidification. We're going to just have this contract forever. And we never made the effort to have the level of relationship with the acquiring company. And so eventually they were like, just stop, we're done, turn it all off. And we were an e-commerce processor. So all of their revenue stopped with us, and all of our revenue off of those transactions also stopped. And so there were really two things. The point was we were growing and growing, no problem. We felt like everything was in order. We made some assumptions. They're typically okay assumptions in our case. The worst of the worst happened, right? And so when we had a downturn, of course, then we weren't prepared because the risk we took was our growth is going to continue.
Yeah.
And then what we realized with the loss of a client is that, man, that capital investment that we talked about a year ago would be really helpful right now. It would have lessened that blow of a revenue, dip. Yes. And of course, we're like, whatever, we can grow, we'll do anything. So it took us a few months, but we were back on the growth path, just a little bit less in sales, but the sales path continued at the same place that it was. So we didn't really lose a whole lot of time in the grand scheme of things. But that one piece, and you want to know something? When revenue started going back up and we didn't have a reason, we never looked back. And so it could have helped us. And then it turned out it didn't help us. And we saw both sides of that in the period of 6 months, basically.
Wow. That's impressive.
I'd say lucky and maybe naive, but it all worked out. I mean, sometimes it's better to not know.
Yeah. It's like, well, it's in the secret sauce. I don't want to look.
Yeah. What? We have secret sauce? Now, you've been in technology for a while.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you get started? How did you just say, I want to be in a world where we're providing services across the internet?
Actually, that was kind of random. At the time when I came up with the idea, had a fitness equipment company. We were working on making smart equipment that tied into your phone so you could buy exercises. And while I was doing that, I went to go visit my mom, and she had a bad contractor experience. And I was like, you know what? I can come up with a way to solve this. So I sat down, wrote a business plan, did absolutely nothing with it. So then,
what an exercise.
Yes. So fast forward another couple of years, I left the fitness company, and I'm sitting at home, and everyone's like, you've been sitting on this idea, you should get started. So I launched Perserbid, and we started building out our very first iteration of what would become the MVP that we got launched last year, and that we're now moving away from currently. So,
isn't that interesting? So it's really been a journey in that capacity. Now, for you to go through the exercise of writing a business plan and then doing nothing with it, was it because it was a shiny object at the moment and you realized somewhere along the way, this is a shiny object and I need to pause? Or was it something else?
It was something else. It was a great idea. I wanted to do that. But at that time, I was focused on trying to get a prototype out to the market for the equipment we were trying to get out. And it was more of, I can focus on what I'm doing now rather than trying to focus on two things at one time.
People try and do that all the time. I hear, and I understand that in your 20s, when you're trying to figure out how you're going to buy a house before you're 40, when you're trying to figure out how to get out of your parents' basement to even live on your own before you're 30, right? Those are really hard things. How do I get out of debt from school, provided secondary education occurred, or whatever else there might have been? Something happens and there's a great growth path, and now you have a family, you have a spouse, you might have children and animals, and you have to move home with your parents. Oh my goodness. And that happens, that happens to people in their 30s and in their 40s. When it used to happen to people in their 20s. And so I find this fascinating, because what I heard you say was, I want to focus on one thing. And I also made a choice. I made a choice to do a prototype.
Yes.
Now, that has big risk in and of itself, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. How did you weigh out the risks of going, I've got a business plan and it might do something, but here's this prototype? What was the purpose of, or how did you decide to choose and go down the road of prototype?
We had gyms interested in our product. And so from my perspective, I was like, well, I've got people who want this product. it's, if I can get this product out, here's sales, I can then move down the line to get going. Learned a lot of lessons after that moment, but yeah, it was.
Don't we all?
Yes. there's no class you can take. It's all hard knocks.
Right. Entrepreneur, whether you're inside a large organization or you're on your own,
Yes.
there are a different set of obstacles, but they're still both there.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you went the route of the prototype.
Mm-hmm.
Were you successful? Did you bring this prototype to market for the audience, right? The people that wanted to buy this?
No.
Okay.
Learned a hard lesson. So the prototype, we were getting it built, and we were unable to raise the capital to finish getting the prototype in a fast enough time span. And we were unable to do any pre-sales because we weren't further enough along to do all that. But it's one of those things, looking back, we should have focused more on raising capital than going out to market. Well, I shouldn't say we shouldn't have cut back on our marketing, like going out to the gyms and talking to them, but we should have focused more on raising capital. I had no idea how to do that. My business partner had no idea how to do that. We were two guys, great idea. Let's make a business. And yeah, that was.
I'm going to be really, I might get some backlash for saying this, but until we actually raise money, I'm not exactly sure we know how. Doesn't matter if we went to school to do that. I mean, I went to school to run a business. I don't use, no offense, business school. I don't use anything I learned from you. I learned everything. I used everything that I learned from hands-on experience. Now, what it did teach me was how to think, right? And so here you went through this process and you had all these lessons. And so what I just noted, sometimes there's so much out of our control. All we can do is influence, because all the pieces may be there, yet they're just going to fall where they may.
Yeah.
And did you ever feel like you were so close that if you just had that last little bit to give, you could have?
I do feel like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because with Jet for Gadgets, I do feel like if we had that extra amount, we could have gotten it. And I'd probably not be doing Persever right now.
Right. Well, okay. But here's this thing. You did this thing on a whim.
Yes.
You put it aside because of an experience a family member had, and you knew you could do something with it. And then it just kind of sat there, almost like, almost like those, I don't know, like an acorn.
Yeah.
That turns into an oak tree at some point that the squirrels forget about.
Yeah.
They don't eat it. Whatever the case may be. And then it starts to grow. So all this other stuff came. Did you actually say, okay, did you make a conscious decision to move away from that? Or did you just say, let's just let that ride and do this too?
So it was a conscious decision to end Get Fit Gadgets. And then it was one of those, you talked about moving back home with your parents. It was like, hey mom, moving back home.
Yep. Yep. Oh, I did not know I was talking about you. But hey, it happens to the best of us, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Oh, it does. And so keep going. Okay. So, and then did you say, and by the way, here's what I'm doing next?
Yes, I did actually.
Yeah.
And they weren't too thrilled. They thought that I'd gotten my entrepreneurial side out with the first company. I was like, nope, that just revved me up to do more. So
how did they protect you? What were the things they said to you when you said, I'm going to do this again?
They said, it didn't work out the first time. Maybe you should consider just getting a professional job and working for a company. And by that time, I'd already gotten the bug. I was like, don't know if I really want to do that. So
your partner is all in on this?
No. So he went off to start another business in, I think, Boulder. And
that's where I'm at. We connect. I had no idea. Okay. So he's in my backyard.
Yeah. And I'm on the other side of the country now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you said, okay, we're done together.
Mhm.
This was a great adventure.
Yes.
And I'm guessing the parting ways I'm guessing it was good. And it was here's
good.
my idea, and they don't really fit together.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So the parting was good.
Yep,
So
parting was good. By the way, that's a really important thing. A lot of times those don't end well. No, I've had a couple of that don't end well. They don't end well. And it's like, why not? Why not? So parted well, you're doing your own thing. Purserbit is here. It has started to, you're building this. You've got an online platform.
Yeah, so to help homeowners and contractors handle payments and protect both parties through an escrow system.
So who else? Is there anybody else
now
that
there's
is in this space with you?
Yes. So I started it by myself, had no programming experience, got somebody to build the initial platform. And then I taught myself programming along the way. And then we started off as an LLC. Then we switched from an LLC to a corporation when I brought on 2 new partners.
Mm-hmm.
And,
fantastic.
Yeah.
And so now there's a trio.
Yes.
And what are the hats, right? I'm guessing you're each wearing 1 or 2 hats that don't overlap with each other. How did Purserbid split up those hats in its leadership?
So I'm founder and CEO. Robert, he is the finance. He comes from a finance background. And so he does most of our financial stuff. And then Matt comes from the fitness world, but he started several gyms, so other fitness companies came in, and he's helping with business process. And then I'm doing vision. I do like marketing stuff, and just wherever we all kind of wear each other's hats at times. Because it's like for a startup, you just don't have for us, we don't have overly defined roles. We'll all look at the numbers, or even though that's Rob's primary job, we all go through strategy, even though I built out a long-term vision, Rob's built out a path. And then we have our roles, but we all cross as well. So.
Well, and you have to. I mean, that's what a good leadership team does, is I'm in charge of this. I will make sure it shows up. I will interpret what it is. I will be the one who says, here's our opportunity. Here's our risk. We're on track. We're not on track. Come with the recommendation. But then all that does is set up a good discussion.
Yeah.
Right?
Many times, very good discussion.
Yeah. Well, and even when it's not, it's the right discussion, because having partners, maybe you don't have any partners, but you have an executive leadership team audience. Maybe you have a management team audience. There's going to be a mess sometimes.
Yes.
Because that's what it is. Being human is really messy. And people like to take the mess out of it, right? That's where we get all this process and procedure and accuracy or performance or some of those things. And, we're only as good as the people that are doing it.
Yeah.
So when you, can I ask you a question about conflict?
Yes.
When there's conflict, right? Maybe it's just a slight disagree, or maybe it's a flat out, if we're not careful, we're going to have a brawl disagreement, or at least some raised voices, right? Mm-hmm. Totally can happen. I've seen it firsthand. I'm the only one at my company at that level here, but in past companies, I've seen it. And a lot of my clients bring that to the table. And the feistiness only comes from passion. And so when we have conflict, how have you decided to work with conflict between you and your team?
So whenever we come up with a disagreement, it comes down to one, why are we disagreeing? If Rob has an idea and I disagree with it, I'll ask him, okay, give me the reason why this is a good idea. Here are all my objections, address the objections. And then here's my idea, give me your objections. I'll address all those objections. And then we address all that, sit down and look at it, and then we'll come to a decision either way.
You're listening, you're watching. Use hashtag VBB Radio to join the conversation. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Stay current and receive programs to continue sparking ideas about growth strategy by subscribing to the program at voiceofboldbusiness.com. Now, back to Jess.
You are listening to program 204, The Risk of Not Taking the Next Step. And I'm talking with Edwin Williams about reflections, about experiences, about the way we use the information that we have to make the best decision in the moment. And if you're like me, you've already gleaned enough to add to that context that you have to really apply to a potential problem that you're trying to grapple through. Because the things that we're talking about, when we talk about not taking an action or losing a big client or responding versus reacting, all we're doing is recognizing the risk we took. And so when we also are looking at our choices and we're looking at what's the risk of the choice we didn't take, we might find something interesting, maybe not to use right now, but maybe to use later. And we heard Edwin talking about this when he was sharing the story of this experience that was shared with him. And he was like, we can be better. We can do better. This must be better. And he wrote a whole business plan and then tucked it in a drawer for a while. And then it came back out. And here's where they're at right now with Purserbid. So before the break, Edwin, you were talking about the way, and I'm going to call it a tie, the way you make a decision when there's equal weight for both sides. So you've decided that this is the decision to be made. Mm-hmm. And there's equal weight on both sides. And you said you break the tie with the data.
Yes.
And so do you always use the same data to make that final influence to tip the scale?
Well, it depends on the topic we are looking at. So we will put out our points, and basically if either way looks good, all three of us will have a talk about it. And then the decision will come from that. And so far, once the decision's made, no one's been upset long-term after. Everything has been going. And that's how we handle. Hopefully it stays as we grow and add more people. But so far, how we do it with looking at the data, here's my objections. Did you address them? Here's yours. Did I address them? And then going from there has worked out good for us.
So we were talking during the break, and during the break or right before the break, wherever Scott decides to edit this at, you were talking about how when you created this version of the company, Purserbid, and you brought on somebody,
yes,
you now were a duo, and it was like a marriage. And somebody said that to you and you were surprised.
Oh, yes.
How right were they?
Very, because you can't just go and make a decision. You're responsible not just for yourself and your company, but you're also responsible for your business partners as well. And so when you're making a decision with regards to your company, you have to take into account how this affects your company, how this affects your business partner. And when you get employees, which in the term of marriage, if we're using that metaphor, are your kids, how does that affect them going forward as well? So that was one of the things that I realized with my first company was very true, was you are tied to your business partner or partners for as long as you're in business. And it's not like hey, we're never going to talk again. No, you're with them. So you better like them.
Yeah. It's really funny. I was having a conversation on Friday. We had last Friday, I hosted the Growth Strategy Summit. And that's actually something that came up, is what happens if you are and you totally shut that conversation down, yet being able to treat each other as humans, as part of humanity. We tend to lose sight of that in our anger sometimes, and in our frustration and our inability to process emotions, and whatever our automatic go-to reaction is when we feel like we're being affronted. And so how much did you have to learn from that perspective of, well, here's how I'm reacting. Is this actually right or not?
Well, that was a learning experience, okay, because I don't think people are very good at that from the get-go, where it's like, here's my emotions. How do I put my emotions aside and look objectively at the situation and make a decision that way? We are very drawn by our emotions and sometimes take something personal where someone's like, well, that's a bad idea. You think they're talking about you personally. They're not. They're talking about your idea. And you have to learn to divorce that emotion from the idea and look at it objectively to make a decision like, hey, maybe we're on the wrong path. Let's go a different direction.
This thing called self-awareness. And you know what? I don't know. I think this is going to be a lifetime thing for me, this concept of self-awareness. Where am I with me? What reaction is because I'm actually reacting inside of myself versus what reaction am I having because there's like warning flags, but I can't articulate very quickly where they came from. I process a little slow. I'm one of those people who started to say something witty here because I think of the cool witty thing in the moment the next day. So even before I understood, I took a while to process. I was compensating for it and actually working in a way to allow things to go forward and have a little humor in the process. And it is, you talk about this open communication, and I've shared this story before, but I had a business partner that we only agreed and we only agreed on the surface. And once we got into anything, there was always this dead stop. And no matter what we tried to put to it, sometimes we tried all emotion. That never worked. Sometimes we tried logic. That never worked. Sometimes we just made decision and crossed our fingers. That never worked. So it was very interesting because we couldn't figure out how to work together to align our values to the mission and just get the work done and get to market, right?
Yes. I think, I don't want to harp too much on the communication, but I think you have to understand that you can be wrong, which helps a lot in discussion. Because if you think you're always right, you'll never accept another perspective coming in. So you have to understand that you can be wrong, even though you think you are correct.
And if you're talking with somebody who can't be wrong, recognize there's some reason in their life that made them in a way they can't be wrong. Somebody belittled them. Somebody made them second guess. Somebody did this. And it doesn't matter. It was just the way they responded. And then it became a story. Mm-hmm. And we can only be responsible for our stories and just lovingly show up and go, oh, that's a story. Let's figure out how to do this. And the steps you articulated earlier are great steps. And because it sounds like when there's something that could go either way and you have to find the thing that'll tip the scale. It sounds like in your office and your team, you're agreeing on what's going to tip the scale and then you apply it to the situation. Mm-hmm. It's not like, well, let's look and see, does it go my way? Of course I want that. Maybe that is for some of us, but I don't think it has to be. And so that's something that I find. And it's okay to talk about communication because this show's all about business. It's all about business growth. It's all about achieving growth. And what people don't realize is that there's more communication involved than a process, than a piece of technology, than a way we do things, than a procedure, than what somebody else said to do because it worked for them. All of those combined don't touch, it's the phrase like light a candle. They don't come anywhere close to touching the compounding importance of communication along the way.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you had alluded to the fact that your company is pivoting again.
I wouldn't say pivot. I'd say it's taking a detour.
Take the detour. Okay. And tell me the difference. Will you just define pivot for us? So when you describe to us taking a detour, we have a frame of reference. We're going to join you in the way you define pivot.
Yeah. So pivot is we are, as a company, would be moving to a totally different direction. So like we're in the residential contracting space. We deal with homeowners and contractors. For us, a pivot would be, okay, we started in residential contracting. We're going to get into retail selling fluffy toys or something like that. For us, the reason why I say detour is our long-term goal is the same, but due to events that happened last year, we realized we had to take a different path, redefine our market, and then address that, and then come back to our long-term plan at a later date. And so basically, we were on this path. We did our official launch last year, August 2017. Sorry.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And we were moving along, and then we realized we were running off a cliff. Our burn rate was super high. We were looking at our bank account, looking at how the platform was coming along, and realized we were on an unsustainable path. And basically we got knocked on our butts. So we're all sitting here like, we're dead if we keep going down this path. What do we do? So, and actually this discussion didn't just involve the three of us. It involved people in our co-working space, investors. We already met different people. And what we ended up deciding was we had gotten a lot of feedback from people who had signed up on our platform and people who had looked at it, tested it. And one of the big issues, if we were looking at our marketplace, was the contractors was our critical leg. And they were giving us a lot of feedback into what they wanted out of the platform. So we decided, well, what if we just split the platform in two? Create an app specifically for contractors and an app specifically for homeowners. We give the contractors specifically what they want to help them with their business, and then go back and then give the homeowners exactly what they wanted in their own specific app. And then rebuild our long-term goal using those two apps. So that's what we decided to do. The new app is called, for the contractors, Zenhammer. So getzenhammer.com is our landing page. You can put in your email to be alerted of our beta test.
Cool.
But it was, we literally all of us were in like panic mode. And another piece of advice that was very important that I got during that phase was never make a decision desperate. So
yeah,
while I was panicking, I was very careful not to make a decision. I kind of waited until after that emotion swept by, so then all of us could sit down and talk and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's where we messed up. Here's what we need to change. And interesting enough, that profile picture I sent you was literally 2 days after my panic attack ended.
Way, no way.
Yes.
Wow. Well, you looked good for being in the midst of all of that. And sometimes, we like to compartmentalize those and we like to put them away. Mm-hmm. And that can be detrimental in a whole different capacity to our own well-being, because we then become, we put our heads in the sand, right? We're avoiding things. And it sounds like you didn't avoid things. You faced things head on. And I have to tell you, you may have heard the stats. 1 in 100 businesses will make it 10 years in business. Number one. Number two, the biggest reason businesses fail is cash flow. Yes. Cash flow. And so being able to get real, and it's awesome that in your co-working space, you were able to pull in extra resources and brain power and brainstorming, because we need to get out of our own way sometimes. And the only way we can do that is by being willing to be open and a little vulnerable with people who we kind of want to show how awesome we are, but we also kind of want to succeed. And, yeah. And you have the mix there.
So I'm right in the middle of the pivot. So give me 6 months, I can tell you if it worked or not.
Oh, I love it. Yes, we're definitely going to have that follow-up story, because here's the thing I liked about your detour. So it's a pivot, an internal pivot to get control of the things necessary to make the business viable. Mm-hmm. And then it's just kind of a detour. I'm thinking like bowling lanes with the bumpers already up. You're hitting the edge, and you know what those are, yet the ball is still going forward. So in 6 months, you're still, when you said we have the same long-term plan, that same long-term vision, that tells me there's a piece that most businesses don't have in place, because when they're going through that much burn rate and they're starting to have those conversations about how to cut back, what ends up happening a lot of times is there's just contraction. There's not decisions based off of the long-term vision. And that long-term vision might have been a year, and now it might be 3 years, but there are measurable milestones between that can then be found. And so I think this pivot detour, because you're right, it's not a pivot. It's a change in behavior today to get to the same tomorrow.
Yes.
What are you most excited about now that this has been identified and talked about within your team?
I like the excitement it's brought back. What a lot of people don't realize, when you're running towards that cliff, it's an emotional drain on everybody. And you're not excited to wake up the next day, because you're like, there goes another X amount of money today and we've got to do something. But now that we've got our new direction, with the 2 apps that are going to be coming out, first a contract app, and technically it's a property management app coming out later, is that everybody's excited again. We've got the energy back, and even the contractors and the homeowners who've been following us in the area are very excited, and everybody's re-energized basically. So that's been the biggest thing, is the energy this detour has brought back to not just a company, but to people who are watching us, who've worked with us, and that type of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Energy management is such a big part, because in a startup phase, whether that startup phase is 3 months or 3 years, right, that both are viable startup phases. In fact, there are companies that stay in that startup mentality for 10 years. And then they're like, oh, well, we don't know how to do anything else, so I guess we'll exit. Or, oh, we have to like totally add to our whole team because we have habits and we have skills and we've maxed out our skills and we've built these habits, and it's not going to get us to that next level. So what do we do? How do we look at that? And the fact that that's already in your place, that which I'm hearing in the process, I'm hearing in the conversations, that's a big deal in regards to where you're going and what can you do. So what do you think has been the biggest lesson, right? We're talking about reflections, and we're talking about the risk of not taking the next step. Mm-hmm. And you looked and realized there's risk of not taking the next step by going on this detour. But you also could have just totally avoided it, which was a choice and comes with its own risk. Yes. So when you're thinking about things like that, and we are talking about risk and these journeys, what is the biggest lesson that you have learned through all of this when it comes to risk?
Be smart about how you make that decision. So for us, with where we were and our decision to make this detour, if we stayed on the path we were on, we were out of money way too fast, and we were dead in the water. So for us, it was like, the path we're on was unsustainable. We can't be on it. We had to find another path to stay active. But likewise, even if we could have made a bad decision changing our path, but we got a lot of feedback back from people. So when you're making your decision of the risk you should take, don't just work within your team, get data from other places, see what other people in your industry have done, even other industries, because you have similar models, maybe not just residential contracting, but e-commerce for fluff toys, but get the data, understand what it is, and then make your decision. Don't just jump off. If you're trying to make an airplane and jump off a cliff, that analogy of being an entrepreneur is jumping off the cliff and building an airplane before you hit the ground.
Right.
Make sure you've got the parts before you jump off the cliff. Don't just jump off the cliff and hope you find the parts on the way down. Right?
Oh, Oh, temper that.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that's what spring was for. Oh.
I know, right? Did you notice my pause? I'm like, shoot, call the kettle black. Because I'm telling you, I am the one to jump in the deep end and then go, oh, I forgot to take my shoes off.
So,
yeah.
And,
keep going.
And also, don't be afraid to say you've made a mistake. And that's like been the other thing where it's like, people are willing to give you advice and help if you admit that, okay, we made a bad decision. We understand why we made the bad decision. Now we need help figuring out how to get out of that bad decision.
Yeah, we have to own our stuff.
Yeah.
We do. We have to own our stuff. So what makes it bold? What makes it bold to evaluate risk in the decision that we're making, but also in the choices that we choose not to take?
It could be a big payoff. Like I think of the FedEx CEO, when they were about to run out of money to fuel their jets, he took the last bit of his money, went to Las Vegas, played blackjack, won enough to keep them fueled for a week so he can get the contracts to keep his business. And that's like, that I don't recommend anybody taking their money to Vegas to like make revenue to business, but that works.
Well, do what it takes. There's a different, do what it takes. He felt pretty confident in his blackjack skills, apparently.
Yes.
Yes, but it's true. Will you put it all on the line? And will you look at it and go, yeah, the worst that can happen is I lose it all. Mm-hmm. Even if we're not playing blackjack, this is still the decision. Yeah. And I take the step anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, I'm telling you. Yeah. What's the biggest thing that your partners have taught you?
Understanding different perspectives. So I like that we all come from different backgrounds. And I like that I don't get a consensus. If I say, hey, let's go this way, it's hardly ever okay, we'll do that too. It's, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And I like that. And so working with them with different viewpoints and then learning to come to a decision that everybody's comfortable with has been the biggest lesson that I've gotten from working with my business partners.
You will find all the program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P204. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 204. You may also search the website for the risk of not taking the next step. It's your turn to keep this conversation going. You heard Edwin today sharing amazing stories about the journey that his startup is on, and we've all been there. Either as a startup, we're finding ourselves in a new role with different expectations, or we're in a situation where everything that we thought we knew turns out to not be relevant or useful in the situation we're in. So rate this program on the platform that you're listening and watching from. iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, because it's through your ratings we know that the content is helpful to you in your role. Also, when you comment and use hashtag VBBRadio, not only do we get to hear your feedback, we also, together, are building the definition of what it means to be an effective leader today and think about our growth strategy. So let's learn from each other's experiences and your takeaways and our takeaways by using that hashtag between our programs. It's powerful to know the risk of not taking the next step.
The Voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. When you aren't seeing the growth results you want, it's time to get an outside perspective. To discuss your specific situation around growth strategy, work with us. Visit voiceofboldbusiness.com and click Find Out More. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.